In sheer, translucent garments, barefoot, they carried trays of food. They walked with their heads bowed, shrinking from the cold and fear. One of them was Christina. Stepan almost let out a howl. He wanted to leap up, to scream, to empty both barrels into the colonel's massive figure. His fingers found the triggers on their own. It was about 70 meters to the porch. For his rifle, it was the maximum range. But he wouldn't have missed. He would have dealt Gromov a serious wound. But Stepan was an experienced hunter. He saw 4 guards. They had automatic weapons. If he fired now, he would take out one. Maybe he'd have time to reload and hit a second, but then they would riddle him with bullets, and Christina too. What would they do to her if he died before her very eyes? They would simply eliminate her as a witness. They'd bury her right here, under the banya, and no one would ever know the truth. He looked through the telescopic sight, taped to his rifle, at his daughter's face. In 5 days, she had aged 10 years. A huge bruise under her eye was concealed with powder. Her lip was split. But the most terrifying thing was her eyes. They no longer held that light, that sky he loved so much. In them was an emptiness, a glassy, dead emptiness of a person who had been broken, turned into an object. "Move it!" Gromov slapped Christina's lower back with his palm. "Pour for the guests and smile. You like guests, don't you?" Christina flinched as if from a blow, but began to pour the drink into the faceted glasses. Her hands trembled. The liquid splashed onto the table. "Ah, you clumsy thing!" roared the director of the artel, and with a full swing he struck the girl across the face. Christina fell into the snow. The tray clattered onto the steps. "To the cooler with her," Gromov commanded lazily. "Let her sit in the cellar and think. And you," he nodded to the guards, "bring a new one. There was a new girl in the barracks. We'll deal with this one later." 2 guards grabbed Christina by the arms and dragged her not into the house, but to a shed standing apart. They threw her inside like a sack of potatoes and slammed the heavy door, the bolt clanging shut. Stepan lowered his rifle. His breath caught. Hot, angry tears streamed down his weathered cheeks, freezing on his mustache. He had seen everything. He understood everything. This was no dacha, it was a camp. The Taiga master's personal harem. They kept girls here, girls whose mothers were searching for them all over the region. Here they were broken, humiliated, passed from hand to hand. And when they grew tiresome, they were simply written off. The Taiga is vast. It hides all secrets. Friends, for a moment, put yourself in Stepan's shoes. You see your child, the one you held in your arms, being beaten and humiliated by drunken men, certain of their impunity. What would you do? Would you charge into a heroic but senseless attack? Or would you be able to clench your teeth, crawl back into the darkness, and prepare a retribution that would make hell itself tremble? Write in the comments, attack or cold revenge. This is important because Stepan's choice will determine the fate of everyone in this drama. Stepan chose the latter. He crawled away quietly, like a scout, without disturbing a single branch. He understood the main thing. They couldn't just be eliminated. A quick end would be too easy a gift for them. They had to go through the same fear, the same terror that these girls had endured. They had to feel what it was like to be the prey, helpless, pathetic prey, cornered and trapped. He moved a kilometer away from the lodge, found an old empty bear den, and built a tiny fire in a pit so the smoke would dissipate into the ground. And then he began to work. Stepan became an engineer of vengeance. He remembered everything his Siberian grandfather had taught him and everything he had seen during the war. He took out wire and stretched it between trees at shin height, an invisible string. He found an anthill, still dormant under the snow, and dug it up. He made a wolf pit on the path the guards used for their perimeter checks. But on the bottom, he didn't just place stakes. He placed sharp branches, angled to make escape as difficult as possible. But he was saving the worst for the colonel. Stepan knew the beast's habits. He knew that tomorrow morning the master would want to hunt. Gromov loved to shoot roe deer, which the gamekeepers lured with salt to a feeding trough near the lodge. It wasn't a hunt. It was an execution. "Good," Stepan whispered, twisting a loop from a steel cable. "You like the salt lick? I'll make you a salt lick." The next morning, the taiga awoke to the roar of engines. The drunken party decided to get some fresh air. The guards brought out the girls, no longer in nightgowns but in rags, and forced them to act as beaters. "Go on, you dogs! Make some noise! Drive the game towards us!" yelled the district party secretary, firing his carbine into the air. That was the last straw. The cup of patience overflowed and cracked. Stepan put on his white camouflage, checked his knife, and vanished into the forest. The hunt was on, but today the prey wasn't deer. The hunt began, but it was a strange hunt. Usually the beaters, gamekeepers who know the forest, move in a line, shouting, banging sticks against trees to drive the animals towards the numbered posts where the shooters wait. Here, everything was different. The drunken masters of life stood in a clearing, leaning against the hoods of their warm cars. They smoked expensive cigarettes, laughed, and passed around flasks of cognac. They were having fun. And in the forest, waist-deep in loose snow, stumbling over fallen branches, ran the girls. They were crying, but they ran, because behind them, toying with his automatic rifle, walked Gromov's head of security, a red-haired brute nicknamed Kaban, the boar. "Move it!" he roared. "Anyone who falls behind will regret it. Drive the elk to the master." Christina ran on the far left flank. She had no strength left. Her feet, in their tattered boots, had long gone numb from the cold. Her lungs burned like fire. She wasn't crying anymore. She just wanted to fall down and sleep, for this nightmare to end. Let her freeze. Let them leave her. Anything was better than returning to that room at the lodge. She didn't notice the shadow detach itself from the trunk of a huge fir tree. A hand, hard and smelling of pine needles and something familiar, clamped over her mouth and yanked her into a snowdrift behind a fallen log. Christina struggled, tried to scream, but then she heard a whisper she would recognize among thousands. "Hush, little daughter, hush. It's me, Papa." She froze. Her eyes widened. Through her tears, she saw her father's face. So familiar, yet so frightening right now. His eyes were as dark as the barrel of his gun. "Papa," she breathed, her lips barely moving. "They'll kill you. Go." "No one will touch me." Stepan quickly unwound his scarf and wrapped it around her neck. "Listen to me. Over there, beyond the ravine, is an old den. I've covered it with branches. Crawl there. Take any of the other girls who are nearby. Stay as quiet as mice so they don't hear you. Don't stick your heads out. Understand?" "And you?" "Me?" Stepan gave a crooked smile, a smile more terrifying than a wolf's snarl. "I'm going to have a talk with the management." Stepan waited until Christina and two other girls he had signaled had crawled into the ravine. Kaban, the head of security, was about 100 meters to the right. He hadn't seen a thing. He was too sure of himself. He lit a cigarette, slinging his rifle over his shoulder. "Hey, why'd you all go quiet in there?" he bellowed into the thicket. There was no answer. "You wretched things, I'll show you." Kaban stepped into the woods. The snow crunched under his heavy boots. He crashed through the branches like a bear. He was angry. The master was waiting for his game, and these hens had scattered. He walked past a juniper bush and didn't notice the steel wire, thin as a hair, stretched taut at neck level. Stepan hadn't made a loop. He'd done something simpler. It was a garrote wire. Kaban was walking fast. The impact hit him squarely across the throat. He didn't even realize what had happened. A gurgle. The rifle fell into the snow. His hands flew to his neck, trying to find what was choking him, but they only found a hot, pulsing stream. He fell to his knees, his eyes bulging. Stepan stepped out from behind a tree. He wasn't hiding. He watched the life drain from the man who had beaten his daughter yesterday. Stepan walked over and kicked the rifle aside. Kaban stared at him with horror and a silent question. "For what?" "For the tears," Stepan answered. "For the fear. Sleep well. The Taiga embraces all." That was the first. Quiet, clean, without a shot. Stepan dragged the body into the bushes. He took the rifle but had no intention of firing it. Noise wasn't needed now. Noise would scare off the main prize. Stepan went back to the crate and picked up his knife. "Remember how they brand cattle in the villages?" Stepan asked. "So everyone knows whose bull is whose. You branded people, didn't you, Yura? You broke their fates. Now it's my turn." He walked right up to him. "You like to work with your hands, don't you? To touch, to hit. So we'll start with your hands." What happened next was fast and terrible. Stepan didn't cut. He acted like a hunter who knows anatomy. He picked up a heavy hammer that was lying in the corner. One precise heavy blow to Gromov's right hand, a second to his left. Gromov howled, straining against his bonds. Stepan didn't sever his hands. He simply turned them into useless appendages. Now this man couldn't even fasten his own pants. He had become completely, utterly helpless. "There," Stepan wiped his hands on the colonel's trousers. "Now you're safe." Gromov hung, breathing heavily. "Kill me?" he whispered. "Be a man. Finish it." "You have to earn death," Stepan replied. "And you haven't earned an easy one. You're going to live, Yura, for a long, long time." Stepan left the shed and returned 5 minutes later with an armful of women's clothing. The same nightgowns, the tattered dresses. "Do they keep you warm?" Stepan asked, throwing them at Gromov's feet. "Can you smell them? The smell of fear?" Then he did something Gromov never expected. Stepan took the colonel's own ID from his pocket, the red booklet with the golden embossing, a symbol of inviolability. He opened it, looked at the photo. "Handsome," he said. "Now watch." He took out a lighter and held the flame to the corner of the document. The ID flared up and quickly turned into a small pile of black ash, which Stepan scattered on the floor. "That was your power, Yura. Ashes." "Friends," many would say. "This is monstrous. You can't do that to a human being." But was Colonel Gromov a human being at that moment? Where is the line beyond which mercy becomes a crime? Write in the comments, Stepan was right, or it was too much. When that was done, Stepan did one last thing. He unbuckled the belt binding Gromov's legs, but left the handcuffs on. "You're free," he said. "Conditionally. The keys to the handcuffs are in the forest, in that pit where your guard froze. If you make it there, you can unlock them. If you don't, well, that's fate." He opened the shed door. Dawn was breaking outside. "Go," Stepan said. "Run, Yura." Gromov staggered out of the shed. His mangled hands dragged in the snow. He was covered in blood, half mad with pain and terror. He saw the forest, the dark, silent forest he had considered his domain. He began to crawl, crawling like a worm. Where to? To the road? It was 40 kilometers away. To people? Who would help him now? He crawled away from that damn place. Stepan stood on the porch and watched him go. He didn't shoot. He knew Gromov wouldn't make it, and even if he was found, what would he be? A cripple, a wreck. Would he tell the truth? Who would believe him? They'd say he'd gone mad. It was a fate worse than a bullet. It was oblivion. Stepan returned to the ravine where the girls were hiding. Christina was awake. "Papa," she looked up. "It's over." "It's over, daughter." Stepan hugged her. He smelled of blood, smoke, and gunpowder, but to Christina it was the best smell in the world. "Get ready, we're leaving?" "And them?" one of the girls asked, nodding towards the lodge. "They're gone," Stepan said firmly. "They were never here. Forget it. It was a bad dream." They left in single file. Stepan walked last. Before leaving, he did one more thing. He opened the gasoline cans in the garage, doused the house and the banya, and threw a match. The flames roared to life instantly. Fire is the best cleanser. It would hide the tracks. When the helicopter arrived, they would find only ashes. They would rule it an accident. Stepan looked back one last time. A huge column of black smoke rose into the sky like a memorial candle. Somewhere out there in the forest, the former master of life was crawling, and Stepan was leading his small troop home. But the story doesn't end there. The journey back was harder than the fight itself. The adrenaline was gone, replaced by a leaden exhaustion. They reached the outskirts of the village late on the second night. Stepan took them to the only man he trusted, the feldsher, medic, Ignat Kuzmich. An old camp doctor, he had seen everything in his life. When Kuzmich saw Stepan and the girls, he didn't ask a single question. "Bring them in," he grunted. All night he tended to their wounds, treated their frostbite, and gave them penicillin. In the morning, Kuzmich told Stepan, "I wrote in the log, group case of frostbite, found in the forest. I didn't see any signs of a struggle. Do you know what's coming? You can probably see the smoke from that lodge from space. They'll be here, and not our local constables." 2 days later, the village awoke to the sound of helicopters. An investigative team from Moscow arrived. The area was cordoned off. The investigator, Viktor Lebedev, young but sharp, quickly realized this wasn't the work of bandits. Bandits would have taken the valuables. This was revenge. Cruel, professional, personal. He quickly learned about the gamekeeper's missing daughter. Lebedev summoned Stepan for questioning. They sat in the office of the village council chairman. "Where were you from the 15th to the 18th of May, Citizen Kornilov?" Lebedev asked. "In the forest," Stepan replied simply. "I'm a gamekeeper. It's my job." "They butchered people like animals at that lodge. Professionally," Lebedev remarked. "I know it was you, Kornilov. My gut tells me. Your daughter disappeared, then she turns up here, and all the girls are silent. It's a conspiracy." "My daughter is at home. She's sick," Stepan replied, his jaw muscles tightening. "Look, Stepan," the investigator's voice softened. "I'm not Gromov. I'm the law. There are 5 bodies. Vigilantism is a capital offense. Confess, and you'll get a lighter sentence." Stepan remained silent. At that moment, there was a knock on the door. The medic, Kuzmich, entered, followed by the collective farm chairman, the school director, and several loggers. They filled the small office. "What is this?" the investigator asked, confused. "Comrade investigator, we've come to give testimony," the chairman said. "What testimony?" "Stepan Andreevich has an alibi. He was at the collective farm all those days, helping fix the roof on the cowshed. The whole crew saw him." "I confirm," the school director nodded. "And I saw him too," boomed the blacksmith. Lebedev stared at them, unable to believe his ears. It was a lie, a brazen open lie. The entire village was standing as one to protect their own. To them, he was not a murderer. He was the cleanser of the forest. "Do you realize you're committing perjury?" Lebedev asked quietly. "I could have all of you arrested." "You can't arrest everyone, Chief," said Kuzmich. "The Taiga is vast, and Stepan, he's one of ours. We won't give him up." "Friends, could you do that? Risk your own freedom to stand up for a neighbor, knowing he had taken the law into his own hands? Right yes or no, an honest question. Investigator Lebedev was an intelligent man. He looked at these people, at Stepan. He remembered the mutilated, moaning Gromov in the hospital. He realized that if he arrested Stepan, he would have a war with this entire village, and a trial of Gromov would expose a cesspool of corruption that would cause heads to roll in Moscow itself. Lebedev sighed and closed the case file. "So he was fixing the roof?" he asked again. "He was," the men answered in unison. Lebedev stood up. The case of the attack on the lodge is closed. Primary theory, a gang dispute. He walked over to Stepan. Take care of your daughter, gamekeeper, and hide that rifle somewhere safe. Lebedev left. Moscow got its convenient story. Gromov was discharged with a disability. The system found it easier to forget. It seemed like a happy ending. But life isn't a movie. Stepan remained free, but he changed. He became withdrawn, silent. The blood he had shed, even an enemy's blood, weighed heavily on his soul. And Christina. She never became a doctor. She couldn't bring herself to go to the city. She stayed in the village, worked in the library, and never married. People said that a light often burned late in the Kornilov house, and you could hear the daughter crying while the father paced from corner to corner. Vengeance had been served, but it didn't heal the wounds. It only cauterized them with a hot iron. But there was one more ending. Many years later, in the 1990s, an old journalist found a strange patient in a home for the disabled near Irkutsk. His chart listed him as unknown, without hands, without feet, unable to speak. The staff called him Mumu. He had lived in the home for 20 years, sitting by a window and staring at the forest. The nurses said he was terrified of men with beards and the smell of pine. When the journalist showed him an old photograph of Stepan Kornilov, Mumu suddenly went into a fit. A hoarse wail escaped his throat, and tears rolled from his eyes. It was Yuri Gromov. He was living in his own personal hell every single day, remembering that shed and that knife. Stepan Kornilov died in 1984, quietly, in his sleep. The entire district came to his funeral. On his grave, they didn't write "Avenger." They simply wrote, "Stepan Andreevich Kornilov, soldier, hunter, father." The door remained open. Cold air rushed into the house, but something else appeared on the threshold. Something heavy was thrown from the darkness into the open doorway. It was a man, bound hand and foot, the second party secretary. He was alive. Pinned to his chest with a hunting knife was a note. Gromov leaned down and read it aloud. 1 for 1. Give me the director, and I'll give you till dawn. If you don't, I'm coming in myself. It was an ultimatum. Stepan was bargaining. Gromov slowly turned his head towards the table where the artel director was hiding. "Did you hear that, Borya?" the colonel asked quietly. "He wants you." "Yura, no," the director shrieked. "We're friends. I have children." "That girl had a father, too," Gromov sneered. Fear gave way to cold calculation. If he gave up the fat man, the gamekeeper would be busy. It would buy him time. "Sorry, Borya." Gromov grabbed the director by the collar and dragged him to the door. "Get out!" Gromov kicked him onto the porch and slammed the door. The director was left alone. "Stepan, Stepanushka!" the director cried into the darkness. "I'm not guilty. It was them." There was no answer from the darkness, but a second later something whistled through the air. A lasso, a simple rope with a loop. The loop tightened around the director's neck. A jerk, and he was pulled off the porch into a snowdrift. He was dragged into the forest, quickly, mercilessly. His screams faded until they ceased altogether. The house was quiet again. Gromov was alone. He got a new bottle of vodka, broke the neck off, and drank half of it in one go. Now it was a duel, 1-on-1. The beast of the taiga versus the master of the zone. Meanwhile, Stepan was in the forest. He hadn't killed the director immediately. No, he had tied him to a tall birch tree. "Sit and think," Stepan said, looking at his terrified face. "Maybe some smart thoughts will come to you, about your soul, for instance." The director whimpered. He was alive and unharmed, but completely helpless. The frost would do its work by morning, and in the meantime he would sit and listen to the wolves howling at the moon. Stepan returned to the lodge. The final act remained, the most difficult one. Gromov was no coward. He was a war veteran, even if he'd been in the rear. He was a good shot, and he was cornered. Stepan knew a frontal assault was impossible, but Stepan had a plan. He remembered the cellar under the house and the ventilation opening in the foundation. He also knew there was a barrel of calcium carbide in the garage. When carbide is mixed with water, it releases acetylene gas, a gas that causes suffocation and a burning sensation in the eyes, worse than tear gas. Stepan threw chunks of carbide into the ventilation opening. Then, using a hose, he began to pour water from melted snow into it. The chemical reaction was instantaneous. A caustic white gas began to rise, seeping through the cracks in the floorboards directly into the living room. Friends, do you think Stepan was right to leave the director to the elements, or should he have ended his suffering? Is mercy to an enemy a sign of strength or weakness? Write in the comments. Strength or weakness? Inside the house, Gromov started coughing again, but it wasn't smoke. It was a sickly sweet smell. Gas, he croaked. He realized he was losing consciousness. He tried to smash a window with his rifle butt, but his arms felt like cotton. The carbine fell from his weakened grasp. The colonel sank to the floor. Stepan waited 10 minutes, then put on a gas mask he had ironically found hanging on a nail in that same garage. He smashed a window and stepped inside. Gromov was lying in the middle of the room, still breathing, but completely unconscious. Stepan kicked the carbine aside and took off the mask. "Get up, Comrade Chief," Stepan said quietly. "The court has arrived." He didn't bother tying him up. Gromov was weaker than a child now. Stepan hoisted the colonel's heavy body over his shoulder and carried him to where it all began, to the very shed where Christina had been locked up yesterday. Colonel Gromov's awakening was terrifying. His head was splitting. He tried to move a hand. Metal clanked. He jerked his whole body and howled. His arms were stretched out to his sides and handcuffed to thick wooden posts. His legs were also bound with a belt. He was hanging, crucified, in that very shed. Opposite him, sitting on an overturned crate, was Stepan. He was sharpening his huge hunting knife. "Awake, are we, master?" Stepan asked. "You," Gromov rasped. "Do you realize what you've done? I'm a colonel in the MVD. They'll search for me. They'll send a division." Stepan raised his eyes. They held such an icy void that Gromov choked on his own scream. "A division? Maybe they will, but you won't see it. And as for searching for you, you know, Yura, the Taiga is a big place. People disappear here sometimes." Stepan stood up and walked closer. "You liked it when they feared you, didn't you?" he asked quietly. "You liked watching the little girls cry. I'll give you money," Gromov babbled. "Gold, foreign currency. I'll get your daughter into a university in Moscow. Just let me go." Stepan chuckled. With a sharp tug, he ripped open the colonel's shirt. On Gromov's hairy chest, a massive cross hung from a gold chain. "Well, look at that," Stepan said with surprise. "A party card in your pocket and a cross around your neck. Did you think it would save you?" Stepan tore the cross off and threw it into the dirt. "You have no God, Chief. Your God is power, and your power ends here. Friends, tell me honestly, do you feel sorry for these people? For the secretary who wept and offered a medal? For the guard who drowned in the icy water? Or does the evil they committed strip them of any right to sympathy? Write pity, or they deserved it. It's the eternal question of where justice ends and cruelty begins." Stepan watched the heavy oak door of the lodge slam shut. He heard the bolts slide home. The lights in the windows went out. They were afraid of a sniper. He sat at the edge of the forest, stroking the cold metal of his gun, and watched the house. "The rats have scurried into their hole," he whispered. "Warm and cozy in there, are you? Don't worry, I'm about to light a fire for you." In Stepan's pocket was not only wire, but also a signal flare, and something else he'd found in Gromov's shed. A can of gasoline for the generator. But he wasn't going to burn the house down. That would be too simple. They would suffocate from the smoke and die an easy death. No. Stepan wanted to look Gromov in the eye. He began to circle the house, gripping an axe. This was going to be the most terrible night in the history of this forest. The night of the long knives. Have you ever heard the sound of fear? Real animal fear in a confined space. It's not screams, it's the heavy, wheezing creak of floorboards, the clink of glass as a man tries to take a drink, but his hands won't obey. And the smell. The elite log house no longer smelled of wood and barbecue. It smelled of expensive cologne, sour sweat, and hopelessness. 3 men sat in the living room by the light of a single electric bulb that flickered intermittently. The generator in the shed was on its last legs. Colonel Gromov sat in an armchair with a semi-automatic carbine on his lap, a rare weapon, a gift from a minister. But right now, that blued steel offered no comfort. Gromov drank cognac straight from the bottle. "Yura, we have to do something," whined the artel director, huddled in the corner of a sofa. "My heart. Let's make a deal. Offer him money. Gold. I've got 2 kilos of unaccounted-for gold dust in my safe." "Who are you going to offer it to?" Gromov spat on the lynx-skin rug. "He doesn't want gold. He wants my head. And yours too, by the way. You were hitting that girl yesterday. You were, so pray now." The third guard, Seryoga, stood by the window, peering through a crack in the heavy curtain with the barrel of his rifle. He was white as a sheet. "Quiet!" the guard suddenly hissed. "Do you hear that?" In the ensuing silence, they heard a sound, a dull, rhythmic thud. Thump, thump, thump. The sound wasn't coming from the door or the windows. It was coming from above, from the roof. Someone heavy was walking right over their heads. "He's on the roof," the director shrieked. "Shoot, Seryoga! Shoot at the ceiling!" "Hold your fire!" Gromov barked. "Save your ammo! The roof is double-layered, insulated. The bullet will get stuck." Have you ever heard the sound of fear? Real animal fear in a confined space. It's not screams, it's the heavy, wheezing creak of floorboards, the clink of glass as a man tries to take a drink, but his hands won't obey, and the smell. The elite log house no longer smelled of wood and barbecue. It smelled of expensive cologne, sour sweat, and hopelessness. 3 men sat in the living room by the light of a single electric bulb that flickered intermittently. The generator in the shed was on its last legs. Colonel Gromov sat in an armchair with a semi-automatic carbine on his lap, a rare weapon, a gift from a minister. But right now, that blued steel offered no comfort. Gromov drank cognac straight from the bottle. "Yura, we have to do something," whined the artel director, huddled in the corner of a sofa. "My heart. Let's make a deal. Offer him money. Gold. I've got 2 kilos of unaccounted-for gold dust in my safe." "Who are you going to offer it to?" Gromov spat on the lynx-skin rug. "He doesn't want gold. He wants my head. And yours too, by the way. You were hitting that girl yesterday. You were. So pray now." The third guard, Seryoga, stood by the window, peering through a crack in the heavy curtain with the barrel of his rifle. He was white as a sheet. "Quiet!" the guard suddenly hissed. "Do you hear that?" In the ensuing silence, they heard a sound, a dull, rhythmic thud. Thump, thump, thump. The sound wasn't coming from the door or the windows. It was coming from above, from the roof. Someone heavy was walking right over their heads. "He's on the roof," the director shrieked. "Shoot, Seryoga! Shoot at the ceiling!" "Hold your fire!" Gromov barked. "Save your ammo! The roof is double-layered, insulated. The bullet will get stuck." The footsteps above ceased, and a minute later the light went out. The generator fell silent. Darkness descended instantly. "Matches! Who has matches?" Gromov roared. As they fumbled for candles, the house began to change. It grew cold. Smoke began to pour from the fireplace, which had been crackling cheerfully all evening. Thick, acrid, black smoke. "There's no draft," the guard coughed. "He's blocked the chimney." It was a classic guerrilla tactic. Stepan, standing on the roof, had simply covered the chimney with a piece of canvas and weighed it down with a heavy stone. The smoke poured back into the room. Within 5 minutes, it was impossible to breathe. "Open the windows," the director rasped. "We'll suffocate." "Don't you dare!" Gromov kicked him. "Open a window and you'll get a bullet. That's what he's waiting for. He's smoking us out like a fox. Endure it. Wet some rags. Breathe through them." But it was impossible to endure. The guard, Seryoga, was the first to break. "To hell with you all!" he screamed, dropping his rifle and bolting for the front door. "I want to live. I'll surrender." He threw back the heavy bolt, flung the door open, and stumbled onto the porch, gasping for the freezing air. "Don't shoot, man!" he yelled into the darkness, raising his hands. Gromov raised his carbine, aiming at his own guard's back. The shot boomed in the confined space. The guard on the porch jerked and fell face down in the snow. "A dog's death for a dog!" Gromov snarled. "Well, anyone else want to go outside?" Back in the clearing, they were getting nervous. "Where is that idiot with the girls?" grumbled the director of the North Artel, a fat man in a fox fur hat. "I'm freezing. Yura, what kind of staff do you have? Can't even have a proper hunt." "We'll sort it out," Colonel Gromov scowled. "Seryoga, Vitya," he yelled to the 2 remaining guards. "Go and see where they've gone. Maybe they ran into wolves." The guards, chambering rounds, reluctantly went into the woods. Stepan was waiting for this. Divide and conquer, an ancient principle of war. One went right, the other left. Stepan chose the one who went left, towards the swamp. Stepan had a surprise prepared there. The guard, a young city boy, moved cautiously. He saw tracks in the snow. Strange tracks, as if someone had been dragging something heavy. "Kaban," he called out uncertainly. "You hear?" Ahead, something glinted in a small clearing. The guard moved closer. On a tree stump in the middle of the clearing lay a massive, expensive gold watch. The Artel director's watch, which he'd lost in the banya the night before while drunk, and which Stepan had found. Greed is a poor counselor. The guard looked around. No one. What a find, he thought. The boss won't remember, and I can buy a car back in the city. He took a step towards the stump. The snow gave way beneath him silently, softly. It was a wolf pit, deep, 2.5 meters. Stepan had dug it during the night, camouflaging it with branches and snow, but there were no stakes at the bottom. At the bottom was ice-cold water. The pit had been dug over a spring that didn't freeze even in winter. The guard plunged neck-deep into the icy slurry. He tried to scream, but the shock stole his breath. The walls of the pit were slippery clay. It was impossible to climb out in a heavy winter coat. Stepan walked to the edge of the pit and looked down. The boy was flailing, turning blue before his eyes. "Cold?" Stepan asked sympathetically. "And how do you think the girls felt in their thin clothes in this frost?" "Mister, help me," the boy chattered through his teeth. "I didn't touch them. I was just guarding." "Guarding?" Stepan nodded. "So sit here now. Guard the water." He turned and walked away. In 10 minutes, hypothermia would do its work. The man would simply fall asleep forever. That left 3 in the clearing and 1 guard in the woods. Stepan moved silently, like a lynx. He knew the panic would start soon. They would hear the silence. In the forest, silence is more terrifying than any scream. When the birds fall silent, when people disappear, fear awakens in the darkest corners of the soul. In the clearing, they were indeed getting nervous. Half an hour had passed, no Kaban, no Vitya, No girls. "What the hell is going on?" the district secretary snapped. "Yura, I don't like this. Let's get out of here." "Go where?" Gromov barked. "I have men out there. Seryoga!" he yelled into his walkie-talkie. "Seryoga, come in." The radio hissed with static, then a voice cut through the crackle. A strange voice. "Seryoga won't be answering, Comrade Chief." Gromov froze. "Who is this?" he rasped, clutching his carbine. "Who are you?" "I am Judgment," the voice replied. "Your personal Judgment Day, Yura? You love to hunt. Now you are the one being hunted. Run." Gromov dropped the radio. Red blotches appeared on his face. "To the cars!" he roared. "Let's go!" He, the secretary, and the artel director scrambled for the vehicles, but surprise number 3 was waiting for them. When they reached the Volgas and the UAZ, they saw that all the tires were flat, but not just flat. Dozens of hunting knives were plunged into the rubber, right up to the hilts. And on the hood of the colonel's Volga lay the head of a boar. Not a man, but a real wild boar Stepan had killed a week ago. But sticking out of the beast's mouth was the security chief's ID card, belonging to the red-haired Kaban. It was a sign, a primal, animalistic sign. "You are meat here." "We're surrounded," the artel director panicked, a thoroughly civilian and cowardly man. "It's a gang, a whole squad." "Shut up!" Gromov hit him with the butt of his rifle. "What squad?" "It's a local. That gamekeeper, Kornilov. It has to be that girl's father." Gromov wasn't a fool. He quickly put 2 and 2 together. "He's alone. He has a double-barreled shotgun. We have carbines and pistols. We'll take him down like a rabbit." "I'm not shooting," the secretary whined. "I'm a party official. They have no right. I'm leaving on foot." He started running down the road towards the settlement. "Stop, you fool!" Gromov shouted. The secretary ran about 50 meters. The road had been cleared by a grader. The running was easy. He thought he was safe. But Stepan had anticipated this too. He knew the psychology of rats. On a bend where the road sloped downwards, Stepan had sawed through a massive dry pine tree beforehand. It was held by a thread. As the secretary drew level with the tree, Stepan, who was hiding on a hill, simply pulled a rope. A crack. The huge trunk crashed across the road right in front of the running official. A branch as thick as an arm whipped him across the face, knocking him off his feet. The secretary fell, screaming in pain. He was alive, but his path was cut off, and from the forest, Stepan emerged, walking right towards him. The official began to crawl, losing his expensive fur hat in the snow. "Don't kill me," he wailed. "I'll give you anything. An apartment in Moscow. A medal. I had nothing to do with it. It was all Gromov. I just watched." Stepan planted a heavy boot on his chest, pinning him to the snow. "Watched?" he repeated. "So you're a spectator. You like to watch others suffer? Well then, watch this." Stepan didn't touch him, not yet. He pulled a coil of wire from his pocket. "Get up. You're coming with me. You'll be my bait. You know they use live bait for bear hunting, don't you?" He tied the secretary's hands behind his back and gagged him with his own fur hat. "If you scream, I'll cut your throat," Stepan promised. "But if you behave, maybe you'll live to see a people's court." Now 2 remained on the road, Colonel Gromov and the artel director, and the last guard, who had already run out of the forest, pale as a sheet, reporting with shaking hands. "Comrade Colonel, it's Vitya. In the pit. He's dead." Gromov looked at the dark wall of the taiga. The sun was setting. It would be dark soon, and at night in the forest they stood no chance against the gamekeeper. 0. Gromov understood they were being herded back to the lodge, into the house, into a trap. "To the house," he commanded. "Barricade ourselves. We have ammunition, food. We'll hold out until morning, and then we'll call for a helicopter." They ran towards the house, glancing over their shoulders, firing into the emptiness. They thought the larch log walls would save them. Fools! They had just locked themselves in a cage, and Stepan held the key.